The typical morning doesn't start with a choice, but with a series of automated transactions. Before you even reach your desk, you have likely already traded capital for minutes. You might grab a coffee from a drive-thru to save 10 minutes of brewing at home, or pay a premium for a toll road to shave 15 minutes. Off a commute that seems to grow longer every year. By the time the sun is fully up, a silent meter is already running. We often think of wealth as a number in a bank account. But for the modern household, the real metric of freedom is increasingly defined by how much of your life you have to outsource just to keep the lights on. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics 2024 Consumer Expenditures report, the average household now spends $26,266 a year on housing alone. That is 33.4% of total annual spending, a massive anchor that dictates every other move we make. But there is a secondary cost, a hidden second rent that no one talks about until it is too late. It is the price of being too busy to be frugal. This concept of a second rent isn't a single bill you pay to a landlord. It is the cumulative overhead of time-saving conveniences that have morphed into recurring fixed costs. We are living through a period where the efficiency of the economy has peaked, yet the individual feels more behind than ever. This happens because we have entered a cycle where we work more to afford the things that save us time so we can go back to work. It is a closed loop of labor and consumption. When we talk about having 0.1 Bitcoin, we aren't really talking about a digital token or a speculative bet. We are talking about the psychological threshold where a person realizes that the traditional path of trading every waking hour for a depreciating currency to pay for outsourced chores is a race with no finish line. It is the moment the math stops making sense. Consider the structure of the modern dual-income family. Data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics in 2024 shows that 49.6% of married couple families are now dual earners. On paper, this looks like a massive win for household wealth. 2 salaries should mean double the progress. However, the reality is often a net zero gain because of the logistical overhead required to maintain 2 professional lives. When both partners are at the office, the home becomes a place that requires professional management. Cleaning, cooking, and maintenance are no longer personal tasks. They are line items. This creates a monthly minimum of expenses that must be cleared before a single cent can be saved. The most glaring example of this is the cost of raising the next generation. Child Care Aware of America reported in 2024 that the average annual cost for child care has reached $13,128. That is a 29% increase since 2020. If we look closer at the trend, the Bank of America Institute noted in October 2025 that childcare inflation was rising at 5.2% year over year, which is 1.4 times faster than the overall rate of inflation. For many families, one entire salary isn't going toward building a future. It is simply paying for the right to go to work. This is a structural trap. You are not buying a luxury. You are paying a mandatory fee to participate in the labor market. Let's look at a hypothetical household to see how the math actually breaks down. Imagine a couple earning a combined $120,000 a year. After taxes, they might take home $85,000. Their primary rent or mortgage takes up that 33% chunk, leaving them with roughly $57,000. Now, add the second rent. Between childcare at $13,000, 2 modest car payments and insurance. Since the Bureau of Labor Statistics notes transportation costs average $13,318 a year, and the various conveniences like food delivery and streaming services to decompress from the stress, their leftover cash evaporates. By the time they pay for the basic privilege of existing in a high-speed economy, they might only have $10,000 or $15,000 left for the entire year. One major car repair or a medical deductible wipes that out. They are running a high-revenue business with zero profit margin. It is interesting to note how our physical relationship with money is changing as these costs rise. The Atlanta Fed's 24 study on consumer payment choice found that the average amount of cash held on a person dropped from $81 in 23 to just $67 in 24. We are moving toward a frictionless, invisible economy. This friction loss is what allows the second rent to grow unnoticed. It is much easier to ignore a $10 delivery fee when you never see the physical $10 bill leave your hand. Why does this change after you secure a meaningful stake in a hard asset? Because it forces a confrontation with the value of time. Holds something that cannot be diluted, you start to see the world in terms of sats per hour or time-to-asset ratios. You begin to question if that $20 lunch is worth the 40 minutes of labor it took to earn it after taxes and overhead. Reasonable people disagree on the best way to escape this. Some argue that the answer is to earn more, to outrun the inflation of convenience. Others suggest a radical downsizing. But the nuance here is that for many, these aren't choices. This doesn't apply if you live in a childcare desert or a city with zero public transit. In those cases, the overhead isn't a lifestyle choice, it's a geographic tax. We also have to acknowledge the reality of time poverty. The Levy Economics Institute found in 2025 that roughly 39% of single adults suffer from time poverty, with employed women facing a 9-point gap compared to men. When you are time poor, you cannot life hack your way out of expenses. You cannot meal prep for 6 hours on a Sunday if you are working a shift or caring for an elderly parent. In this context, the second rent is a survival mechanism. It is the premium you pay to keep your head above water. However, the danger arises when this survival mode becomes the permanent default, even as income rises. The counter-argument here is that these services actually drive the economy. By paying for childcare or food delivery, you are providing income to another household. It is a specialization of labor that, in theory, makes society more productive. Another fair point is that for high earners, their time is mathematically more valuable than the cost of the service. If an attorney bills $500 an hour, it is objectively foolish for them to spend 2 hours mowing a lawn when they could pay someone $50 to do it. These are valid points, but they only hold up if the saved time is actually used for high-value production or meaningful rest. If the time saved by ordering delivery is simply spent scrolling through feeds or working more hours to pay for the delivery itself, no real value has been created for the individual. It is just a transfer of wealth from the worker to the service platform. Let's revisit our household math. If that same couple manages to cut just 20% of their convenience overhead, perhaps by carpooling or finding a cooperative childcare arrangement, they could save an additional $5,000 a year. Over a decade with modest growth, that is the difference between retiring 5 years early or working until 70. But the system isn't designed for that. In 24, only 10% of private sector workers had access to commuting subsidies. The structural support for saving money is almost non-existent. The world wants you to be busy, and it wants you to pay for the privilege. This depends heavily on your stage of life, of course. A 22-year-old with no dependents has a very different monthly minimum than a 40-year-old with 3 children and a mortgage. But the trend is universal. As we gain more responsibility, we trade more of our autonomy for convenience. We stop looking at the price of the item and start looking at the monthly payment. This is how the second rent becomes permanent. It becomes a fixed overhead that you forget you ever had the power to change. Securing a stake in a scarce asset is often the first time a person steps outside the burning building to look at the flames. It provides a baseline of value that isn't tied to a corporate treadmill. It creates a walk-away fund, even if it is small. When you know you have a piece of the future that cannot be printed away, the urgency to pay for every possible convenience starts to fade. You become willing to trade a little bit of discomfort today for a massive amount of freedom tomorrow. You start to realize that the most expensive thing you can buy is a life where you have no time to think. The reality of the 21st century is that inflation isn't just about the price of milk or gas. It is about the price of a minute. As the world gets faster and more complex, the cost of opting out of that complexity goes up. We are being charged a premium for the silence and the space that our grandparents took for granted. To fight back, we have to recognize the second rent for what it is, a choice disguised as a necessity. It is a slow leak in the bucket of our financial lives. Ultimately, wealth isn't about how much you can buy. It's about how much you can refuse to buy. It's about lowering your monthly minimum so that you aren't forced to say yes to every demand the economy makes. It's about moving from a state of constant transaction to a state of ownership. When you own your time and you own your assets, the second rent disappears, and you finally get to keep what you earn. If you sat down today and audited every dollar you spent on saving time over the last 30 days, would you find that you actually gained more freedom, or did you just buy more room to keep running?